They were told the Americans would take the baby, strip her of dignity, make an example. So when Keiko's belly began to swell in the women's camp outside Tokyo, September 1945, the others hid her. Loose clothing, switched work assignments, whispered warnings when guards approached. For 3 months they kept the secret, terror mounting with each passing week. Then a young medic with kind eyes noticed something was wrong, and what he did next shattered everything they believed about the enemy. If stories like this matter to you, make sure to like this video and subscribe. These hidden moments of humanity deserve to be remembered. The war ended on a Tuesday. Emperor Hirohito's voice crackled through radios across Japan, the first time most citizens had ever heard him speak. His words were formal, distant, wrapped in the language of the imperial court. But the meaning was clear enough. Japan had surrendered. For the women of the Imperial Japanese Army's auxiliary units, that broadcast meant the end of one nightmare and the beginning of another. They had served as nurses, clerks, telephone operators, and messengers. Some had never left Tokyo. Others had been stationed across the Pacific, watching the war collapse island by island, city by city, until there was nowhere left to retreat. Now they were prisoners. Not officially, not at first. But as American forces swept into Japan, the women were rounded up, processed, and sent to holding camps. These were not the brutal detention centers of wartime propaganda. They were repurposed schools, warehouses, even temple grounds, surrounded by wire fences and guarded by soldiers who spoke a language that sounded harsh and strange. The camp outside Tokyo sat in what had once been a textile factory. The buildings were concrete and cold, their windows broken from bombing raids that had shaken the city months earlier. Inside, the women slept on thin mats laid across the factory floor. At night, the wind whistled through the cracks, and they could hear the distant rumble of American trucks moving through the streets. The smell hit them first. It always did. American cigarettes, sharp and unfamiliar. Coffee, strong and bitter, so different from the thin tea they had grown up drinking. And food, always food. The scent drifted from the mess hall each morning and evening, rich and overwhelming. Bread, meat. Things they had not tasted in years. The women arrived in groups, herded off trucks with their belongings clutched in their arms. Most carried nothing more than a change of clothes and a few personal items. Some had photographs, others had letters from family members they might never see again. They moved in silence, eyes downcast, waiting for whatever punishment the Americans had planned. Yuki, a former telephone operator from Osaka, remembered the first night clearly. She was 23, small and sharp-eyed, with hands calloused from years of plugging and unplugging cables in military communication centers. She had been trained to stay calm under pressure, to keep her voice steady even when the bombs fell close enough to shake the walls. But nothing had prepared her for this. The Americans did not shout. They did not strike. They simply pointed, gestured, and waited. A young soldier, barely older than Yuki herself, handed her a blanket. It was clean. It was warm. She stared at it, confused, waiting for the trick, the cruelty that must surely follow. It never came. That first night, the women whispered to each other in the darkness. They spoke of home, of families scattered across a ruined nation, of brothers and fathers who would never return. They spoke of shame. They had been taught that capture was worse than death, that surrender meant dishonor, not just for themselves, but for their entire families. And yet here they were, alive, fed, warm. Wait, the fear did not disappear. It settled into their bones, became part of the rhythm of camp life. Each morning they woke, expecting punishment. Each evening they lay down surprised to have survived another day. The contradiction was unbearable. The enemy was supposed to be cruel. Instead, they were something far more confusing. They were organized, they were efficient, and they were strangely, disturbingly kind. The second day brought the medical examinations. The women lined up outside a makeshift clinic, their hearts pounding. Rumors had spread through the barracks the night before. The Americans would examine them, check them, search them. No one knew what that meant, but everyone feared the worst. Yuki stood in line watching the door where women disappeared one by one. Some came out quickly, faces blank, others took longer. When her turn came, she stepped inside and found herself in a room that had once been an office. A desk had been pushed against the wall. Medical equipment sat on metal trays, and standing beside it was an American medic. He was young, maybe 25, with sandy hair and tired eyes. He wore the uniform of a sergeant, and a red cross was stitched onto his sleeve. When Yuki entered, he looked up and smiled. Actually smiled. The expression was so unexpected that she froze. "Hello," he said in slow, careful English. He gestured to a chair. "Please, sit." Yuki did not understand the words, but she understood the gesture. She sat. The medic opened a folder, wrote something down, then looked at her with that same gentle expression. He did not touch her. He did not demand anything. He simply checked her eyes, her throat, listened to her breathing with a stethoscope that felt cold against her chest, even through her shirt. The entire examination took less than 5 minutes. When it was done, he handed her a small card with her name written in English. Then he did something that made her breath catch. He bowed, Not a full bow, not the deep, formal bow of Japanese custom, but a bow nonetheless, a sign of respect. Yuki left the room shaking. Outside, the other women crowded around her, asking questions in hurried whispers. Was it bad? Did they hurt you? What did they do? Nothing, Yuki said, and even she could hear the confusion in her own voice. He did nothing. He was kind. The word felt strange in her mouth. Kind. The enemy was not supposed to be kind. As more women went through the examination, a picture began to form. The Americans were checking for diseases, for injuries, for signs of malnutrition. They gave out vitamins, small white pills that the women were told to swallow each morning. Some refused at first, certain the pills were poison. But when the first women who took them woke up the next day feeling stronger rather than weaker, the resistance faded. The medic became a familiar presence in the camp. His name, they learned, was Sergeant James Cooper, though most of the women simply called him the Kind One when they spoke of him in Japanese. He made his rounds each day, checking on the sick, bringing medicine, always speaking in that slow, gentle voice that made it seem like he was trying not to frighten them. He was not the only American who showed kindness, but he was the one they noticed most. Perhaps because he smiled, perhaps because he bowed, or perhaps because in a world that had taught them to fear the enemy, he was the first crack in that wall of terror. The first real meal came that evening. The women were marched to the mess hall, a long room with tables and benches that smelled of soap and food. They filed in silently, taking their places, waiting for whatever scraps the Americans would throw at them. Instead, they were handed trays. Actual trays, metal and clean, with sections for different foods. A soldier behind the counter scooped rice onto each tray. Not the thin gruel they had eaten during the final months of the war, but real rice, white and steaming. Next came vegetables, then meat. The women stared at their trays in disbelief. This was more food than many of them had seen in a single meal for over a year. Some had survived on nothing but sweet potato stems and miso soup so thin you could see the bottom of the bowl. Now they sat before a feast. Yuki picked up her chopsticks. The rice was still hot, releasing small clouds of steam. She took a bite, and the taste was so overwhelming that tears sprang to her eyes. Around her, other women were doing the same. Some ate quickly, desperately, as if afraid the food would be taken away. Others ate slowly, savoring each bite, unable to believe it was real. One woman, an older nurse named Tomoko, could not eat at all. She sat with her hands in her lap, staring at the food, tears streaming down her face. "My son," she whispered. "My son is starving in Hiroshima, and I am here eating like this." The guilt was crushing. They were prisoners, and yet they were fed better than their own families. The contradiction was almost unbearable. How could they eat when their mothers, their children, their husbands were scraping by on scraps? How could they accept this kindness from the people who had bombed their cities into rubble? But hunger was stronger than guilt. One by one they ate. And when the meal was done, when their stomachs were full for the first time in months, they sat in stunned silence, trying to understand what was happening to them. That night back in the barracks, the women spoke in whispers. Some insisted it was a trick, that the Americans were fattening them up for some darker purpose. Others wondered if perhaps the propaganda had been wrong, if the enemy was not the monster they had been taught to fear. Yuki lay on her mat, staring at the ceiling. Her stomach was full, but her mind was chaos. Everything she had been told, everything she had believed was starting to crack, and she did not know what would be left when it finally shattered. The barracks were not comfortable, but they were better than expected. Each woman had a sleeping mat, a blanket, and a small wooden box for personal belongings. The concrete floor was cold, and the nights were chilly, but they were dry and safe. No bombs fell, no air raid sirens wailed. For the first time in years, they slept without fear of sudden death from above. Work assignments came on the third day. The women were divided into groups. Some would work in the kitchen, preparing meals under the supervision of American cooks. Others would do laundry, mending uniforms, and washing linens. A few with nursing experience were assigned to help in the medical clinic. The work was not difficult. In fact, it was easier than anything they had done during the war. No 12-hour shifts in hot factories, no running through bombed streets delivering messages. Just simple, steady labor that filled the hours between meals. And they were paid. Not much, just a few coins each week in occupation currency. But it was something. They could use it at the small canteen that had been set up in one corner of the camp, where they could buy soap, toothpaste, even small candies. Yuki spent her first earnings on a bar of soap. Real soap, not the gray lye mixture they had used during the war. It smelled like flowers. She held it to her nose and almost wept. Such a small thing. Such a simple pleasure. And yet it felt like a luxury beyond measure. The Americans continued to surprise them. When one of the women fell ill with a fever, Sergeant Cooper came to check on her personally. He brought medicine, monitored her temperature, and stayed until he was certain she would recover. When she tried to thank him, bowing deeply despite her weakness, he simply smiled and said something in English they could not understand. But his tone was gentle, reassuring. Slowly, cautiously, the women began to relax. The fear did not disappear entirely. It could not, but it lessened. They began to talk more freely in the barracks, to laugh occasionally, to remember what it felt like to be something other than terrified. It was during this time in late September that Keiko arrived. She came on a Thursday, brought in with a group of women who had been working in a hospital in Yokohama. She was quiet, 20 years old, with long dark hair that she kept tied back in a simple knot. She moved carefully as if afraid of drawing attention, and she wore her uniform shirt loose, untucked, hanging over her skirt. At first no one noticed, but Yuki, assigned to help process the new arrivals, saw something that made her pause. Keiko's hands, when she filled out her paperwork, trembled slightly, and when she sat down she arranged her shirt carefully, making sure it draped just so. Yuki said nothing, but she watched. And that night, when Keiko changed into her sleeping clothes in the dim light of the barracks, Yuki saw what the loose uniform had hidden. Keiko was pregnant. The discovery changed everything. Yuki waited until the other women were asleep, then approached Keiko's mat. She knelt beside the younger woman and spoke in a whisper so quiet it was almost lost in the darkness. "How far along?" Keiko's eyes flew open. For a moment, terror flashed across her face. Then slowly she relaxed. She had been caught. There was no point in denying it. 5 months, she whispered back. Maybe 6. I am not certain. Yuki closed her eyes. 5 months, maybe 6. That meant the baby would come in winter. Soon. Who was the father? It was a blunt question, but Yuki needed to know. Keiko's face crumpled. A soldier, Japanese. He was killed in Okinawa. We were not married. My family. If they knew, they would disown me. I have nowhere to go. And if the Americans find out... Her voice broke. They will take my baby. I know they will. Please. Please do not tell them. Yuki should have reported it. That was the sensible thing to do. Keiko needed medical care, proper nutrition, someone trained to help when the time came. But when she looked at the younger woman's face, saw the raw terror there, she found herself nodding. I will not tell, Yuki said. But you cannot hide this forever. As you grow larger, they will notice. I know, Keiko whispered. But perhaps... just a little longer, until I can think of what to do. By morning, 3 other women knew. Yuki had not told them, but they had overheard the whispered conversation in the darkness. And instead of reporting Keiko, they formed a silent circle of protection around her. Tomoko, the older nurse, took charge. She had delivered babies before during the war, when hospitals were full and doctors were scarce. She examined Keiko as best she could in the dim light of early morning, before the other women woke. The baby is healthy, Tomoko announced quietly. Strong heartbeat, good position. But you are too thin. You need more food, more rest. How can I eat more without drawing attention? Keiko asked. Tomoko thought for a moment. We share. At meals we each give you a little from our trays. Not enough that anyone would notice, but enough to keep you and the baby strong. And so began the conspiracy. Each morning, each evening, the women gathered around Keiko during meals. They laughed and chatted, creating noise and distraction, while subtly passing food onto her tray. A spoonful of rice here, a piece of bread there, small gestures that could mean the difference between life and death for the baby growing inside her. They also worked to keep Keiko away from the Americans. When work assignments were handed out, they made sure she got tasks that did not require heavy lifting or close supervision. Kitchen duty was perfect. She could stand at a counter, washing dishes, hidden among the other women. The loose uniforms helped. All the women wore the same shapeless shirts and skirts, making it easy to hide the growing curve of Keiko's belly. But as October turned to November, concealment became harder. Keiko moved more slowly. Her face grew rounder. Her hands swelled. The women watched the Americans carefully, especially Sergeant Cooper. He made his rounds each day, checking on the sick, asking how everyone was feeling. His presence, once comforting, now felt dangerous. If anyone would notice, it would be him. The guilt grew heavier with each passing day. The Americans continued to treat them well. They provided food, medicine, even entertainment. Once a week, they showed films on a sheet hung in the mess hall. American movies full of music and laughter in a world so different from their own that it felt like watching something from another planet. The women sat in the darkness watching Fred Astaire dance across the screen and felt the disconnect between propaganda and reality widen further. These were the people who had destroyed their cities? These people who laughed and sang and showed them movies? Letters began arriving from home. Not many, and often delayed by weeks or months, but they came. Yuki received one from her mother in Osaka. The paper was thin, the handwriting shaky. Her mother wrote of hunger, of cold, of a city still smoldering from the firebombing. She wrote of neighbors who had died, of homes that were now just empty lots. And at the end, in a line that broke Yuki's heart, her mother wrote, I am glad you have enough to eat. Do not worry about us. We will survive. Yuki read that letter 3 times, then folded it carefully and tucked it under her pillow. That night she lay awake staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of her full stomach and the warmth of her blanket, and hated herself for being comfortable while her mother starved. Keiko's guilt was different, but just as heavy. She was hiding something from people who had shown them nothing but kindness. The Americans had not hurt them, had not starved them, had not treated them cruelly, and yet here she was, lying to them every day, terrified they would discover her secret. "What if they are not as cruel as we think?" she asked Yuki one night. "What if they would help me?" Yuki wanted to believe that, but fear was stronger than hope. "We cannot take that risk," she said firmly. "They might help you, or they might take your baby and send you away. We do not know, and until we do, we keep you hidden." The other women agreed. Better to be cautious. Better to protect Keiko and her unborn child, even if it meant lying to the kind medic who checked on them each day, even if it meant betraying the trust of guards who had never given them reason to fear. But keeping the secret took its toll. The women grew nervous, jumping at sudden sounds, whispering urgently whenever an American approached. They rotated positions during meals so that different women sat beside Keiko, making it harder for anyone to notice the pattern of food sharing. They made excuses when she moved slowly or needed to rest, and they prayed. Even those who had never been religious found themselves praying. To Buddha, to Christian God, to whatever spirits might be listening. Praying that Keiko would stay healthy, that the baby would come safely, that somehow they could keep the secret just a little longer. November brought colder weather. The concrete floors of the barracks grew icy at night, and the women huddled under their blankets for warmth. Keiko felt the cold more than the others. Her belly was large now, impossible to fully hide. She wore 2 shirts, one over the other, and kept a blanket draped around her shoulders, even during the day. Tomoko checked her regularly, as much as she could without proper equipment or privacy. "The baby is strong," she would report, "but Keiko is weak. She needs real medical care, a doctor, a proper bed." "Not yet," Keiko would whisper. "Just a few more weeks, please." But time was running out and everyone knew it. It was Sergeant Cooper who first sensed something was wrong. He had been making his rounds for months now, long enough to know the women by sight, if not by name. He noticed patterns. Who ate well, who seemed withdrawn, who might be getting sick before symptoms fully appeared. And he noticed that Keiko was being protected. He did not know why. But he saw how the women clustered around her during meals. How they made excuses when she moved slowly. How they positioned themselves between her and any American who came too close. It was subtle, but it was there. Cooper did not push. He had learned in his months working with the Japanese women that pushing only made them retreat further into themselves. Whatever was happening, they would reveal it when they were ready, or when they had no other choice. One morning in mid-November, he stopped at the kitchen where several women were working. Keiko was among them, standing at a sink washing dishes. She wore a thick sweater despite the heat from the stoves, and she moved with careful precision, as if every motion required thought. Cooper watched her for a moment, then approached. The other women tensed immediately. Yuki stepped forward, placing herself between Cooper and Keiko. "Good morning," Cooper said in his slow, careful English. He had picked up a few Japanese phrases, but still relied mostly on gestures and tone. "Everyone okay?" "Yes," Yuki said quickly. "Everyone is fine. Very good." Cooper nodded, but his eyes drifted to Keiko. She had turned away, focusing intently on the dishes, her shoulders hunched. Something about her posture made him pause. He had seen that stance before. The protective curl, the way someone stands when they are trying to make themselves smaller. He did not say anything, but as he left the kitchen, he glanced back one more time, and in that moment something clicked. The loose clothing, the protective behavior of the other women, the way Keiko moved. He had seen pregnant women before. His sister had been pregnant when he left for the war. He knew the signs. Cooper said nothing to anyone, not yet, but he began watching more carefully, and the women, sensing his attention, grew more nervous. They knew. They knew he was starting to understand. That night, Yuki called a meeting in the barracks after lights out. 6 women gathered in the darkness, speaking in whispers so quiet they could barely hear each other. "The medic knows," Yuki said. "He has not said anything, but I saw it in his eyes. He knows." "What do we do?" one of the women asked. Tomoko spoke up, her voice firm despite her age. "We tell him. We have no choice now. Keiko is maybe 3 weeks from her time. If anything goes wrong during the birth, she could die. The baby could die. We need help." "But they will take the baby," Keiko whispered, her voice breaking. "I know they will. They will say I am unfit. They will say I cannot care for a child. They will send me away and keep my baby, and I will never see my child." Again. The women fell silent, because they did not know if Keiko was right or wrong. They wanted to believe the Americans would help. but wanting to believe and actually believing were two different things. We wait, Yuki decided finally. If the medic confronts us, we tell him the truth. If he says nothing, we say nothing. And we pray that Keiko stays healthy until the baby comes. It was not a good plan, but it was the only plan they had. The next 2 weeks were the longest of their lives. Every day brought new anxieties. Every time Sergeant Cooper appeared, the women tensed, waiting for him to say something, to demand answers. But he remained quiet, watchful, patient. Keiko grew heavier. Her ankles swelled. She struggled to sleep, tossing and turning on her thin mat, one hand pressed against her belly where the baby kicked and shifted. Tomoko checked her each morning, worry lines deepening on her face. The baby has dropped, Tomoko said one morning in early December. It will be soon. Days, maybe. Not weeks. Yuki felt her stomach clench with fear. Can you deliver the baby here? In the barracks? Tomoko hesitated. I have done it before. During the war, but those births were all healthy women, young women. Keiko is weak, malnourished. If there are complications... She did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. The women debated among themselves. Some argued they should tell Sergeant Cooper everything, let him help. Others insisted they had come this far and could manage on their own. The arguments went in circles, getting nowhere. Meanwhile, the rest of camp life continued. The Americans prepared for Christmas, hanging decorations in the mess hall, teaching the women English Christmas carols. The absurdity of it was almost too much. Here they were, prisoners of war, singing Silent Night in broken English while hiding a pregnant woman from their captors. One evening, during one of these music sessions, Sergeant Cooper approached Yuki. She was standing at the edge of the group, not singing, just watching. He stood beside her for a moment in silence, then spoke quietly. Your friend, he said. The one in the kitchen. She's pregnant, yes? Yuki's breath caught. For a moment she considered lying. But when she looked at his face, she saw no anger there. No judgment, just concern. Slowly she nodded. Cooper nodded back. How far along? Yuki held up 8 fingers, then 9. She was not sure exactly, and she did not have the English words to explain. Cooper's eyes widened slightly. 9 months? The baby is coming soon? Another nod. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked, Why did you not tell me? Yuki struggled to find the words. She pointed at Keiko, then made a rocking motion with her arms. Baby. Then she pointed at Cooper, then made a gesture as if something was being taken away. Her meaning was clear. They were afraid he would take the baby. Cooper's face softened. No, he said gently. No, I would not take baby. I help. Understand? Help. Yuki wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to believe him. But fear was a hard thing to let go of. You promise? She asked in halting English. You promise no take baby? Cooper met her eyes. I promise. No take baby. Only help. Mother and baby stay together. I promise. And somehow, despite everything, despite all the propaganda and fear and distrust, Yuki believed him. That night, Yuki gathered the women again. They met in their usual spot, huddled in the darkness, voices low. She told them what Sergeant Cooper had said. That he knew. That he wanted to help. That he promised not to take the baby. The reactions were mixed. Some felt relief. Finally, they could stop hiding, stop lying, stop carrying this terrible secret alone. Others were skeptical. How could they trust an American soldier? How could they believe his promise? Keiko sat in the center of the group, her hands resting on her swollen belly. She was the one who would suffer most if Cooper was lying. She was the one who would lose her child. And yet when she spoke, her voice was steady. I believe him, she said quietly. I do not know why, but I do. And I am tired of being afraid. I am tired of hiding. If he wants to help, let him help. Tomoko agreed immediately. As a nurse, I am telling you, we need his help. I do not have the supplies to deliver this baby safely. If there is bleeding, if the baby is stuck, if anything goes wrong, we need a doctor. We need medicine. We need things I cannot provide. One by one, the others nodded. They were all afraid. But they were more afraid of losing Keiko or her baby because they were too proud or too scared to accept help. The next morning, Yuki approached Sergeant Cooper as he made his rounds. She bowed deeply, a formal gesture of respect and supplication, then looked up at him. We need help, she said in careful English. Keiko need help. Baby come soon. Cooper nodded immediately. I help. Show me. Yuki led him to the barracks where Keiko was resting. The other women parted to let him through, watching nervously as he knelt beside Keiko's mat. He spoke softly, his tone gentle, asking questions in English that Tomoko tried to translate. How are you feeling? Any pain? Can you walk? He examined her carefully, always asking permission before touching, always explaining what he was doing. His hands were gentle and professional. When he was done, he sat back on his heels and spoke to Tomoko. Baby coming very soon. Maybe 2-3 days. She need to be in clinic. I set up bed. Private. Just for her. I bring doctor. We make sure baby comes safe, okay? Tomoko translated and Keiko nodded, tears streaming down her face. Relief. Finally, relief. Cooper stood and looked around at the gathered women. You keep secret good, he said with a small smile. Very good. But no more secret now. We help together, okay? The women bowed in unison. Some were crying, others were smiling. All of them felt the weight of months of fear finally lifting from their shoulders. That afternoon, Cooper returned with a stretcher and 2 other American soldiers. They carried Keiko to the clinic gently, carefully, as if she were made of glass. The women followed, a silent procession of protectors, unwilling to let their friend out of their sight. In the clinic, Cooper had prepared everything. A real bed with clean sheets, blankets, pillows, medical equipment laid out on a tray. And standing beside it all was an American doctor, an older man with gray hair and kind eyes who smiled when he saw Keiko. Through Tomoko, the doctor explained what would happen. They would monitor Keiko closely. When labor started, they would be right there to help. If anything went wrong, they had medicine, equipment, everything needed to keep both mother and baby safe. And after the baby was born, Keiko could keep her child. They would stay together. No one would separate them. Keiko could barely speak through her tears. Thank you, she whispered in English. Thank you. Thank you. Labor began 2 days later, just before dawn. Keiko woke with a sharp pain in her lower back, a tightening sensation that made her gasp. Tomoko, sleeping on a mat beside the clinic bed, woke instantly. It is time, Tomoko said. She hurried to wake Sergeant Cooper, who was sleeping in a nearby room. Within minutes, the clinic was alive with activity. Cooper and the doctor moved with practiced efficiency, checking Keiko's vital signs, timing her contractions, speaking in low, calm voices. The other women gathered outside the clinic, waiting. They could hear Keiko's cries, low and controlled at first, then rising in pitch as the hours passed. Yuki paced back and forth, unable to sit still. She had never felt so helpless. Inside, Keiko labored through the morning and into the afternoon. The pain was overwhelming, worse than anything she had imagined. But every time she wanted to give up, she felt Cooper's hand on her shoulder, heard his voice telling her she was doing well, that she was strong, that the baby was almost here. Tomoko held her other hand, speaking to her in Japanese, reminding her to breathe, to push when the doctor said push, to rest when she could. Between contractions, Keiko would close her eyes and whisper prayers she had learned as a child. Please, please let my baby be healthy. Please let everything be all right. As the sun began to set, painting the clinic windows gold and orange, the baby's head crowned. The doctor spoke urgently, his hands moving quickly. One more push, he said through Tomoko. One more. You can do this. Keiko pushed with everything she had left, and then suddenly there was a new sound in the room. A thin, wavering cry. The sound of life. The doctor lifted a tiny, squirming baby into the air. It's a girl, he said, smiling broadly. A beautiful, healthy girl. Cooper cut the cord while Tomoko cleaned the baby with warm water and soft cloths. Then carefully, gently, they placed the infant on Keiko's chest. Skin to skin, mother and daughter, together. Keiko looked down at her daughter and wept. The baby was perfect. 10 tiny fingers, 10 tiny toes, a head full of dark hair, eyes that blinked open, unfocused but searching for her mother. Hello, Keiko whispered. Hello, little one. I am your mother. I am here. I will always be here. Outside, the women heard the baby's cry and erupted in cheers. They hugged each other, laughing and crying at the same time. Yuki felt tears streaming down her face and did not bother to wipe them away. Their friend was safe. The baby was safe. Everything was going to be all right. Later that evening, Cooper came out of the clinic and found the women still waiting. He was exhausted, his uniform rumpled, but he was smiling. Mother and baby both healthy, he said. Very strong, very brave. The women bowed deeply. Some tried to thank him in English, others simply pressed his hands between theirs, a gesture that needed no translation. Cooper bowed back. It was a small bow, nothing formal, but it was genuine. A sign of respect between people who had been enemies and were learning, slowly, to be something else. That night, Yuki lay on her mat staring at the ceiling. Everything they had been taught about the Americans had been wrong. They were not monsters. They were not cruel. They were just people. People who could show kindness even to their enemies. People who kept promises. It was a profound realization, and a profoundly uncomfortable one. Because if the Americans were not monsters, then what did that mean about everything else they had been told? What did it mean about the war? About their own government? About the propaganda that had shaped their entire lives? The questions had no easy answers. But as Yuki finally drifted off to sleep, she knew one thing for certain. The world was more complicated than she had ever imagined, and that was terrifying. but it was also somehow hopeful. The days after the birth were a turning point for everyone in the camp. Word spread quickly about what had happened, how the women had hidden Keiko, how Sergeant Cooper had discovered the truth, how he had helped instead of punished, how the baby had been born healthy and beautiful. The American soldiers heard the story too. Some were moved by it, others were confused. Why had the women been so afraid? Did they really think Americans would hurt a pregnant woman or take her baby? The disconnect revealed how deep the misunderstanding between cultures ran. But for the women in the camp, the birth of Keiko's daughter became a symbol. It represented everything they were learning about their captors. That Americans could be trusted, that they kept their promises, that mercy was not weakness but strength. Keiko remained in the clinic for a week, recovering her strength. The baby, whom she named Yuki after the friend who had first discovered her secret, thrived. She nursed well, slept soundly, and filled the clinic with her tiny mewling cries. Cooper checked on them several times each day. He brought extra blankets for the baby. He made sure Keiko had enough to eat. And when Keiko tried to thank him again and again, he would just smile and say, "It is my job. I am happy to help." But it was more than his job. They all knew that. He could have reported Keiko the moment he discovered her pregnancy. He could have followed regulations, done things by the book. Instead, he had chosen compassion. He had chosen to help. One afternoon, as Keiko sat in bed nursing baby Yuki, Sergeant Cooper brought in a gift. It was wrapped in plain brown paper tied with string. Inside was a small stuffed bear, soft and worn, with button eyes and a faded ribbon around its neck. "My sister," Cooper said, his English slow and careful so Tomoko could translate. "She sent this. For baby. She say every baby need a friend." Keiko took the bear with trembling hands. It was such a simple thing, such a small kindness, but it broke something open inside her. This man, this enemy soldier, had asked his sister to send a gift for her baby, a Japanese baby, the child of someone who had fought against his country. She bowed deeply, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she said in English. "Thank you so much." When Keiko was strong enough, she returned to the barracks with baby Yuki in her arms. The women crowded around, taking turns holding the infant, marveling at her tiny perfection. For a few hours, they forgot they were prisoners. They forgot about the war. They were just women, celebrating new life, finding joy in the simple miracle of birth. That evening, Yuki wrote a letter to her mother. She told her about Keiko and the baby, about Sergeant Cooper and his kindness, about how everything they had been taught about Americans was wrong. Then she paused, pen hovering over paper. Should she really write that? Would the censors let it through? Would her mother even believe her? In the end, she wrote it anyway, because it was the truth. And the truth she was learning mattered more than propaganda or pride or fear. The response from the American command was surprisingly positive. When Cooper reported what had happened, his superiors praised him for his handling of the situation. The story even made it into a military newspaper, framed as an example of successful post-war relations with Japanese civilians. But for the people involved, it was never about good publicity or military success. It was about human beings treating each other with dignity. It was about enemies learning to see past propaganda and fear. It was about the simple, revolutionary idea that mercy could be more powerful than cruelty. One night, about 2 weeks after the birth, the women gathered in the barracks for an informal celebration. They had saved their rations to make a small cake, pooled their money to buy tea from the canteen. They sat in a circle around Keiko and baby Yuki, passing the infant from hand to hand, each woman taking a turn to hold her, to whisper blessings, to welcome her into the world. Cooper had been invited. He sat awkwardly among the women, accepting tea and cake, smiling at the baby when she was placed in his arms. He held her carefully, supporting her head like his mother had taught him, and felt the weight of responsibility. This tiny life had been entrusted to his care, and he had done his best to protect it. As the evening wore on, someone began to sing. It was a Japanese lullaby, soft and sweet. One by one, the other women joined in. And there, in a prison camp in occupied Japan, with the war barely over and wounds still raw, enemies sang together. For a baby, for hope, for the future. Cooper did not understand the words, but he understood the melody. He understood the love in their voices, the joy in their faces. And he understood, perhaps for the first time, what it meant to choose compassion over hatred. When the song ended, silence fell. It was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of peace, of understanding, of bridges built where walls had once stood. And in that moment, everyone in that room knew that something had changed. Not just in the camp, but in themselves. They had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. They had moved from enemies to allies to something more fundamental, human beings recognizing the humanity in each other. The months that followed brought changes to the camp. Winter settled in, cold but not unbearable. The women adapted to their new routines, their work, their strange life as prisoners who were treated more like guests. And at the center of it all was Keiko and her daughter, a living reminder of what kindness could accomplish. Baby Yuki grew quickly. She was a happy child, quick to smile, even quicker to cry when hungry. The women doted on her, competing for chances to hold her, to play with her, to make her laugh. She became the camp's unofficial mascot, a source of joy in a place that had known so much fear. Cooper continued to check on them regularly. He brought formula when Keiko's milk ran low. He found a proper cradle for the baby. He even arranged for Keiko to have lighter work duties so she could spend more time with her daughter. Small kindnesses that added up to something much larger. Word of the story spread beyond the camp. Other American soldiers came to see the baby, to bring gifts, to marvel at this small miracle born in the midst of occupation. Some brought chocolate, others brought clothes. One soldier, who had a daughter the same age back home, brought a tiny pair of shoes he had asked his wife to send. The Japanese women watched all this with amazement. These were the people they had been taught to hate, the people who had bombed their cities. And yet here they were, bringing gifts to a Japanese baby, smiling at her, treating her with gentleness and care. It forced a reckoning. If Americans could be this kind, then what did that say about the war? About the propaganda they had been fed for years? About the lies they had believed? The women talked about it late at night, when the barracks were dark and they could speak freely. Some still struggled with loyalty to their homeland, with the shame of being treated well by the enemy. Others had already made peace with the contradiction, accepting that the world was more complex than they had been taught. As spring approached, talk turned to the future. The war was over. Japan was rebuilding. Eventually, the women would be released, sent home to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives. But what would they find there? And more importantly, what would they bring back? Keiko worried constantly about returning home. She was an unwed mother with a half-American name for her daughter and a story about kindness from enemy soldiers. How would her family react? Would they accept her? Accept baby Yuki? The other women tried to reassure her. Times were changing. Japan was changing. Perhaps her family would understand. Perhaps they would welcome the baby with open arms. But Keiko knew better. She had seen how deeply tradition ran in Japanese culture. An unmarried mother was a source of shame. A child born under these circumstances would face stigma. She could hope for acceptance, but she could not count on it. Cooper sensed her anxiety. One afternoon he pulled her aside and, through Tomoko's translation, made an offer that stunned her. If her family would not take her back, he would help her. He would use his connections to find her work, to find her a place to live. He would make sure she and baby Yuki were safe. Keiko could barely speak through her tears. Why would he do this? He owed her nothing. She was just a prisoner, just one of hundreds of women in this camp. Why did he care so much? Cooper's answer was simple. Because it is right, he said. Because you deserve help. Because your daughter deserves a future. It was not about nations or politics or military duty. It was about basic human decency. And that, more than anything else, was what changed Keiko forever. The day came when the women were told they would be going home. It was early spring 1946. The cherry blossoms were blooming, dusting the campgrounds with pink and white petals. The women packed their few belongings, preparing to leave the place that had been their prison and, strange as it seemed, their sanctuary. On the final day, they gathered one last time in the courtyard. Sergeant Cooper stood before them, his expression solemn. Through Tomoko, he thanked them for their patience, for their strength, for teaching him as much as he had taught them. Then the women, one by one, approached him. They bowed deeply, formally, in the traditional Japanese way. Some pressed gifts into his hands, small origami cranes they had folded, drawings they had made, letters thanking him for his kindness. Cooper accepted each gift with humility, bowing back, his eyes bright with unshed tears. When Keiko's turn came, she carried baby Yuki in her arms. The infant was 6 months old now, chubby and healthy, with bright eyes and a ready smile. Keiko bowed as deeply as she could while holding her daughter. "Thank you," she said in English, one of the few phrases she had learned. "Thank you for my daughter's life." Cooper reached out and gently touched the baby's cheek. "She will do great things," he said. "I know it." Then he turned to all the women and spoke his final words to them. "You taught me," he said, "that enemies can become friends, that fear can become trust, that even in the darkest times humanity survives. I will never forget you." And so the soap, the food, the kindness became more than survival. They became proof that even in war, even between enemies, compassion can flourish. For Keiko, the gentle hands that delivered her daughter became a symbol that mercy is not weakness, but the strongest force of all. The women returned to Japan carrying stories that contradicted everything they had been taught. They told their families about the American medic who kept his promise, about the soldiers who brought gifts for a Japanese baby, about the humanity they found in the last place they expected. Not everyone believed them. Some accused them of being brainwashed, of betraying their country, but others listened. And in those listeners, seeds were planted, seeds of understanding, seeds of hope for a different kind of future. Keiko did return home, and though her path was difficult, she raised her daughter with love and strength. Baby Yuki grew up hearing the story of her birth, of the American soldiers who protected her mother, of the medic who promised and kept his word. She grew up knowing that enemies could become friends, that fear could become trust, that kindness could bridge any divide. Years later, Keiko told her grandchildren, "I was afraid they would take you from me. Instead, they gave me back my life. They showed me that even in the darkest times, there are people who choose compassion." Never forget that. Never forget that we all have that choice. And that is the story worth remembering. And not just because it is a tale of kindness in wartime, but because it reminds us that we always have a choice. We can choose fear or trust. We can choose hatred or compassion. We can choose to see enemies or fellow human beings. The choice always is ours. If this story moved you, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. These hidden moments of history, these stories of humanity in the midst of horror, deserve to be told and remembered. They remind us that even in our darkest hours, compassion can light the way forward.